Gemara says in Megillah, the Hamid Aleph, Amr Beloz and Amr Rabbi Hanina, Rebbe Natan Atir B'Purim, Rebbe planted a tree on Purim, Rochatz B'Kroinish Shal Tzipurei Shavasar B'Tammuz, and he went to the bathhouse on Shavasar B'Tammuz. Ubikesh la'akar Tisha B'Av, and he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. V'lo hodulo, but the Chachamim did not agree with Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and even though he wanted to, the Gemara says he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av, which is a pella, we'll see what it means. V'lo hodulo. This is what Rabbi Elazar Hanina said about Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Comes along Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda, and he says, Rebbe, referring to Rabbi Elazar Bar Hanina, like Hacha Yamaisa, you got it wrong. Rabbeinu HaKadosh never wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. Ella, what was it talking about? Tisha B'Av Shchaliyos B'Shabbos Habi. That year, Tisha B'Av came out on Shabbos, like this year. V'dachinu la'achar Shabbos, and they pushed off Tisha B'Av to after Shabbos. Amar Rebbe, and Rebbe said, you know what? Once it's a nidcha, hayo v'nidcha yidcha. Since it's a nidcha already, yidcha, let's not have Tisha B'Av that year. The Chacham said no. Even when it's a nidcha, even when it's pushed off to Sunday, because you can't fast on Shabbos, you still have to fast on Sunday. You know, if a person has a bad dream, he's allowed to fast on Shabbos. But Tisha B'Av can't be on Shabbos. There is a shita of the Abu Draham that the Beis Yosef brings that says that there's one fast that if it would come out on Shabbos, he would fast it on Shabbos too. That's Asar B'Tevis. But Rashi or Hamid Aleph in Megillah says when Asar B'Tevis comes out on Shabbos, you don't fast on Shabbos. The Rambam says you don't fast Asar B'Tevis on Shabbos. The Pasuk says by Yecheskel, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, so it seems to be a special inyan Abu Draham holds you fast Asar B'Tevis on Shabbos. So the question is, if a person has a bad dream, he's allowed to fast on Shabbos. Asar B'Tevis, according to one Rishon, you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. But Tisha B'Av, you can't fast on Shabbos. So why is Tainas Chalom better than Tisha B'Av? What's the reason? Well, the Or Sameach says that the Mabit says that it's an Isser min HaTorah if a person fasts the entire Shabbos and doesn't eat. So except for Yom Kippur, which is Shabbos Shabboson, you can't have a fast on Shabbos. But Asar B'Tevis, according to Abu Draham, Tanis Chalom is on Shabbos, are only fasts that start in the morning. But on Friday night you can eat. Therefore, you will not violate the Isser D'Oraisa of fasting on Shabbos. But Tisha B'Av, because it was made by the Chacham to be a fast, which you keep for the night and day, that's why Tisha B'Av can't be on Shabbos, because that would be a violation of the Din HaTorah of fasting on Shabbos. So it's not that Tisha B'Av is less important than Asar B'Tevis or Tainas Chalom, but it's because there the fasting by day would not violate the Isser Torah of fasting on Shabbos. But by Tisha B'Av, because the fast day is night and day, that would be a violation. That's why we push Tisha B'Av off to Sunday. Right? And Rabbeinu HaKodesh said, okay, so once it's in Yidche. So after they told him this, Kollel, so the original one that misquoted Rabbeinu HaKodesh said, Tovim Hashnayim Eno Echad. It's a good thing you were at the shir also, because you picked up what Rabbeinu HaKodesh said, and I made a mistake. I thought Rabbeinu HaKodesh wanted every Tisha B'Av to be no longer a fast, and in fact, it was only Tisha B'Av Shechaliyos B'Shabbos that Rabbeinu HaKodesh wanted not to fast. Now, Tosfos asks an interesting question. According to the thought of the first Talmud quoting Rebbe, that he wanted to be Ma'aker Tisha B'Av on all times. Kasha. He says, this is so hard to understand. How could a Tana even think the Rebbe Hoyeroitza Laker Tisha B'Av V'Gamri? How could anybody think that Rabbeinu HaKodesh would say, let's chuck Tisha B'Av? Ha'amrina, the Gemara says, Kohoecho v'shaisa v'Tisha B'Av, if you eat and drink on Tisha B'Av, ein roya min ha'chamasa shel Yerushalayim. You will not see the Geula. So how could Rabbeinu HaKodesh have entertained, how could someone entertain the possibility that Rabbeinu HaKodesh wanted to make every Tisha B'Av not existent? V'od, you can't do such a thing. A Bezdin can't destroy an earlier Bezdin's ruling, Elim Cain, unless the later Bezdin is Gadol Himenu, is bigger in Torah, the Chochmah, by more Torah, Ubeminyan, and more Talmidei Chachamim. So what was the thought of the first Tana that thought that Rabbeinu HaKodesh would say, let's chuck Tisha B'Av? So Tosfos answers, you know what? Even the first Tana that thought that every Tisha B'Av should be Nekar, Yesh Loimar, it doesn't mean that he didn't want to have a Tisha B'Av. He didn't want to make this should no longer be Tisha B'Av. Ella, all Rabbeinu HaKodesh wanted to do, the first Tana thought, is mechumra sheyez by mishar tainiyos. He wanted to take it away from being as chumr as every other tainus, because there's a lot of chumras in Tisha B'Av. We have avelus, we sit on the floor, we start the night before. It's more chumra than Shavasar B'Tammuz and Asar B'Tevis and Sem Gedalia, right? Even though those are all in the same pasuk mentioned in the Navi, but this is the most chumradik one. So he didn't want Tisha B'Av to be as chumr. By the way the calendar works, you don't have to be a expert in the calendar to know that if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, that so does Shavasar B'Tammuz. So that year, if Rebbe wanted to get rid of Tisha B'Av, so what happened to Shavasar B'Tammuz, right? But if all Rebbe wanted to do was make Tisha B'Av equal to other fasts, right? So then there's no reason that he has to say they shouldn't keep Shavasar B'Tammuz, which comes out on Shabbos, let's say, because the whole idea that Rebbe had was only to make Shavasar, is only to make Tisha B'Av less stringent than it is today. So that's what the first Talmud of Rebbe thought. That Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to make Tisha B'Av standard with other tinios, but not to get rid of Tisha B'Av. Then the second Talmud said, no, it was only by a nidcha, only when it comes out on Shabbos. So the Vilna Gaon writes in Shulchan Aruch that even though Tosfos only says this answer to explain the first Tana that thought that Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to make every Tisha B'Av non-existent, that was not the case. He only wanted to make it not as stringent as other fasts. When he was corrected to say that Rabbeinu HaKadosh only wanted to get rid of Tisha B'Av by a nidcha, when it's on Shabbos, even there, Zok de Gain, it doesn't mean that when there was a nidcha, Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted that by a nidcha, it should not be a fast at all, but rather, then the second Tana clarified Rabbeinu HaKadosh's position and said, on a regular Tisha B'Av, Rabbeinu HaKadosh had no problem with the way Tisha B'Av was. And you're mistaken to think that he wanted to make every Tisha B'Av easy. But on a Tisha B'Av that comes out on Shabbos, then he wanted that on Sunday when you do fast, it shouldn't be as chomer. That's what Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to do. And even that, the Chachamim did not allow him to do. So the Vilna Gaon tells us that Rabbeinu HaKadosh's desire was that when Tisha B'Av is a nidcha, it should be easier, it should be like any other tainus. And even though we, lahalacha, hold that Tisha B'Av that's a nidcha, I got a shayla last night from a pregnant lady. Every situation is different, and check with your local Orthodox rabbi. I'm not passing for Los Angeles. But sometimes we have pregnant ladies who will tell them when a Tisha B'Av it's a nidcha, don't fast. Depending how they fast, depending what the situation is, you have to know the case. But a nidcha, when it's pushed off, the halacha is it's easier to get around. That's the fact. Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to make it a law that every Tisha B'Av nidcha is less stringent. And maybe even he wanted to make it, you don't fast the night before, maybe no avelos. It's unclear what he wanted to do, but he wanted to make every nidcha Tisha B'Av like a regular fast. That's how the Vilna Gaon says pshat in this. I believe, by the way, that Rashi did not learn like Tosfos. Because Rashi, when he says, Rashi says, Lagamri. He didn't want to get rid of Tisha B'Av entirely. Ella Osashana. Why does Rashi add the word Lagamri? In other words, the first one thought that Rebbe wanted that no Tisha B'Av should be, and the second one comes along and says, no, he only wanted to make there should be no Tisha B'Av by a nidcha. But Lagamri there sounds not like the Vilna Gaon's learning in Tosfos, that he always wanted that there should be a Tisha B'Av even on a year when it's a nidcha, just it shouldn't be so chomer. It sounds like Rashi was saying that when it was a nidcha, he wanted that year that there shouldn't be a Tisha B'Av at all, which is a very hard thing to understand, because then on that year, thank you very much. In that year, how do you get around the thank you? B'Tisha B'Av, right? Unless you say that's only if it's the day of Tisha B'Av itself, right? but not by Nidcha. So now we have, let's say, go back to Taisus, according to the first Pshat in Taisvis. Now we have a Pshat in Taisvis that Taisus learns, according to the Vilna Gaon's understanding, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh never entertained not having Tisha B'Av by Nidcha. His whole intention was that Tisha B'Av by a Nidcha should be like a regular fast. That was his intention. That's it. Now, I would like to give a historical, and I'm not a historian, a historical reason for Rabbeinu HaKadosh's thinking. But my information that I'm going to tell you now, which is a historical fact, is not something that I know from history, but I know it from a Gevurah Sari that makes such an assessment, and a Yeshuas Yaakov that makes such an assessment, and an Or Sameach that makes such an assessment. I found 3 great Achronim that say an interesting idea. And I want to apply this idea to the thinking of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Listen to this. Everyone knows that Tisha B'Av, a regular Tisha B'Av, the fast is over at night, but everyone keeps Avelus until Chatzos of the next day. It varies this year by Nidcha how you do it, but on a regular Tisha B'Av, right? The Gemara says in Tainis Chavtes, why is that we keep the Avelis when we call it the 3 weeks? It's really 3 weeks and half a day, because we keep the halachas until Chatzos and Yud. So the Gemara says that the pasuk teaches us in the Bayis Rishon, in the first Beis Hamikdash, most of the Beis Hamikdash burnt on the 10th day, and the fire that started was late in the afternoon on Tisha B'Av. Why do we celebrate Tisha B'Av even though most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt on Yud B'Av? So the Gemara says because the Chacham decided Aschalta de Pranusa Adifa. The beginning of a tragedy is more important. So even though there was more burning on the 10th day of Av, but if it started late in the afternoon in Tisha B'Av, that becomes the day of the main morning. In fact, the Gemara says there, and maybe we'll get to the second teres and Taisus yet also, which is more complicated. Rabbi Yochanan said, if I would have been around when they made Tisha B'Av, I would have disagreed with those that made it on Tes. Like Kivativ Ela Basiri, I would have said no. You go according to when most of the Beis Hamikdash burned, not when the beginning happened. Right? Not when the beginning happened. You go with the time that most of the Beis Hamikdash burned. That's the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, but which was not accepted. Now, if you look in the Psukim in the Gemara brings Psukim. The Psukim that most of the Beis Hamikdash burnt on the 10th day was only by Bayis Rishon. What happened by Bayis Sheni? So the Or Sameach, the Yeshuas Yaakov, and the Versari say, thank you, that they think that there's no indication that even though we know that Tisha B'Av is more chomer because it's a day that was, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Ches, the reason why Tisha B'Av is so chomer is because Yom Shehuchbulu Bo Tzaros. It was a day where the burning of the Beis Hamikdash happened both in Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. In fact, you know that in Bayis Rishon, Shivasar B'Tammuz was not the day that they encircled Yerushalayim. Yerushalmi tells us in Bayis Rishon the Beis Hamikdash was encircled on Tes Tammuz. Did you ever hear the 4 weeks instead of the 3 weeks? Right? We keep 3 weeks, not 4 weeks. There's some people that want to keep 4 weeks because of the Bayis Rishon. But our minhag is to keep 3 weeks of Avelos, not 4 weeks, because since the Bayis Rishon was rebuilt, even though the Bayis Sheni was not on the same level as the Bayis Rishon, but it was rebuilt. Since the Bayis Rishon was rebuilt, therefore the main Avelos is Bayis Sheni. Right? So these three Achronim say they think that by Bayis Sheni, most of the Beis Hamikdash burned on Tes, not on Yud. And even though the Gemara says both Batei Mikdash burned on Tes, it means that the first Beis Hamikdash burned on Tes late in the afternoon, and you go according to the beginning. And the second Beis Hamikdash, most of it burned on Tes itself. And what did Rabbi Yochanan mean when Rabbi Yochanan said, if I had lived at that time, they say, you know what it means? That Rabbi Yochanan was saying, if I lived during this 70-year period between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, when they were celebrating Tisha B'Av for those 70 years until the Bayis Sheni was rebuilt, till it became a Yontif, then I would have made it on Yud, not Tes. But now that we're mostly remembering the Bayis Sheni, which was the most recent tragedy, that Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't have made it on the 10th. Why? Because most of Bayis Sheni burned on the 9th. This is what these Achronim suggest is what happened. So if we adapt this thinking, then I want to show you what Rabbeinu HaKadosh was thinking. Okay? Because since the Psukim only say that happened then, that there's no indication to say, when the Chazal say Tisha B'Av Beis Hamikdash was burned on the 9th day, why not assume it was most of the 9th day? Why not? There's no pasuk that says differently. So just when you have a pasuk that tells you that, it's one thing. Otherwise, they say, we assume that it happened on Tes. That's what they say. So now, here is where I think if you follow with their logic, you can understand Rabbeinu HaKadosh very well. The reason why Tisha B'Av is more chomer than all other fasts is because Tisha B'Av is a day that it happened in both Batei Mikdash. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh made the following calculation. He said, listen, when Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos and you fast on Sunday, right? Since Yud B'Av is not a double tragedy day, because most of the Bayis Sheni burned on Tes, so in a year where we don't have the double whammy of Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, let's make the Tisha B'Av to be easier. And therefore, Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to make it that Bayis Sheni, which is the main Avelos, because that's the Beis Hamikdash we lost most recently, that shouldn't be as chomer. So there was a logic behind Rabbeinu HaKadosh's thing. It wasn't just because it was a nidche, which is true, but it's also if you're fasting on Yud, and Yud is a day where most of the Beis Hamikdash did not burn, in Bayis Sheni. So when you're fasting on Yud, you know what you should do? Make it an easier fast. Why didn't the Chachamim agree with Rabbeinu HaKadosh? Because they looked at it that even when you're fasting on Yud, you're fasting on Yud for Tes. In other words, if you look at the day of Yud and you're fasting, you say, okay, I'm fasting today because it also burned. Okay, but how much burned on Yud and Bayis Sheni? Very little. And Bayis Rishon is not the main Avela. So therefore Rabbeinu HaKadosh said, okay, so let's not make Tisha B'Av by Nitcha so mechamer. Comes along the Chachamim and they said, no. Even when we fasted on Yud, we're fasting on Yud for Tes. And therefore, since Tes was a double whammy, L'Kuli Alma, even though the fast on Yud is on Yud, Tisha B'Av has to maintain by a Nitcha the main chumras that it has. So that's the way I would like to explain the machlokas between Rabbeinu HaKadosh, according to Tosfos and the Gaon, and what the minig is. Now, there's an interesting shaila halacha l'maisa, which is an interesting question that Achronim talk about. In fact, somebody had this happen recently. His kid was born on Shivasar B'Tammuz on Sunday. So he's already calculating for his kid's bar mitzvah shetel, based on how in 13 years from now it comes out, the following question, which the Ksaf Sofer and Amnei Nezer talk about. Let's say a kid will be bar mitzvah. Listen to this, Shiloh. Interesting question. A kid will be bar mitzvah this coming Sunday. His birthday is Yud B'Av, Tov Shin Ayin Tes. He's 13 years old. Does the kid have to fast or not? What's the question? Well, somebody could say like this: why should the kid have to fast? Because if we fast on Tisha B'Av, on Yud B'Av, because of Tisha B'Av, on Tisha B'Av the kid was still a katan, and he didn't have to fast. So what did he have to fast the day for? Or do you say, nice Shiloh, no? Or do you say that once he's fasting for Yud, so since the Beis Hamikdash burned on Yud also, so even though we're fasting on Yud, and he only became a gadol on Yud, he also has to fast. No. So how does the Olam paskin? What would you say if you were asked this question? How would you paskin the Shiloh? Should the kid fast or not?
Davis had the elements of active freshman and civil.
But he's a cotton. I mean, because he's a gadol now, but he was a cotton on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, he wasn't obligated to fast because there was no fast. So what would you tell this kid to do? Fast or not? Rabbi Levi Chaim, you got the Shiloh, how would you paskin it? I'm putting you on the spot.
Probably, I don't know, maybe I remember from before, but probably this tomorrow would say since it's patur, it's patur.
Right. It's machlokes, but many shittas say no. Many shittas say, there's a Chuvas Rashba that writes that once we're fasting on Yud, the Rashba says that we take the fact is that the Beis Hamikdash burned on Yud also. And therefore we tell the kid to fast. The Rashba doesn't say this, but some people tell to this Rashba. But it's an interesting question, right? In other words,
What's the Svara?
the Svara is that once you fast on Yud, since this is what they write, the Rashba writes, since Rubei Shohechon Nisraf B'Yud, the Rashba says, so therefore once it's on Yud, you fast because of Yud. Right, it wasn't Niskin as a Tashlumin, right? It was Niskin for this also.
There's no takana. There's no takana.
What?
But there's no takana.
Who says? Who says? Maybe when they made the nitcha, they said, right? It may not work in this tostos, but when they made the nitcha, they said you fast on Yud because of Yud. So now that the kid is bar mitzvah and yud, he can't get away without fasting. I'll tell you a shiloh that came up this year that I know. A kid was bar mitzvah on the day we fasted Shavasar B'Tammuz, which was Sunday. In other words, his birthday was Yud Ches Tammuz. You got it? Now, the question was, listen to this, a real interesting question. The question was, can the kid get an aliyah to the Torah, because it's the first day that he is a gadol? So, one rabbi in the shul that this kid davened in said, he can't get an aliyah. Why not? He's a gadol. His birthday is on Sunday. So the rabbi said, well, 1 second. The only reason why we're reading the Torah on Sunday was because yesterday was supposed to be the fast. And since yesterday was supposed to be the fast, and he was a cotton, so therefore the rabbi of his shul did not allow him to get the aliyah on Sunday morning, because he said, because since yesterday you weren't chayiv in fasting, and today, the only reason why we're fasting today and have Kriyas HaTorah today, it wasn't a Monday or Thursday, we have Kriyas HaTorah anyhow. So you're only fasting today, we're only fasting today because of yesterday's, so you're not chayiv in this fast. How can I give you an aliyah for Kriyas HaTorah? What?
According to this logic, you had a choila.
Well, but chayla could be different. You could say,
It wasn't chayla.
well, there he had a chiyuv, but he had a p'tur. He had a chiyuv, but he was patur. Here he never got the chiyuv, so he went to another shul because other rabbanim right.
Well, it doesn't make sense.
No. You can't say I happen to agree that he should get an aliyah, and I'll explain you why. But you can't say there's no logic to where the first rabbi was going from.
It's not like Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av is also been on the city.
Right.
But here, Shivas Tammuz only was a problem on that
It
day.
only happened on Shavasar B'Tammuz, right?
So it makes
Right.
sense.
So you're going to say, right? In other words,
Well, he's gadol today. He can have the aliyah.
oh, you're right. She's saying he's a gadol today. He says,
That's right.
but he's not chayiv in the Kriyas HaTorah. He's not chayiv in Kriyas HaTorah today because we only had Kriyas HaTorah because yesterday was Shavasar B'Tammuz. He didn't have to fast. So the rabbi didn't want to give him an aliyah.
Yisrael held he wasn't chayav on fasting either.
What? But he must tell he wasn't fasting, chayiv on fasting either, right? Right. In other words, there is a tshuva. There's an interesting tshuva from the Sam Sofer. It's a nice shiloh though. You like the shiloh, right? If it comes up, it's a nice shiloh. But lemaisa, most poskim hold you can give the kid an aliyah. Thank you.
What's the logic to understand?
What? Right? You think you shouldn't get an aliyah?
Not, right?
So I'll tell you. The Sam Sofer writes in a tshuva that one year he wasn't feeling well, and he had to eat on Tisha B'Av. He writes this. You're not supposed to learn on Tisha B'Av, but if you read this tshuva of the Sam Sofer, you see he loved learning so much that this is what he writes. He writes, I was thinking to myself, what's going to happen if the Talmidim in my yeshiva want to give me aliyah by mincha? And I'm not fasting. Can I take an aliyah or not? And he goes through a whole pilpul of what he thought of on Tisha B'Av, of why he said that if I'm asked, I'll be able to take an aliyah. Even though it's all in learning. But it was negela halacha, right? So Sam Sofer thought about it. So Sam Sofer said, yes, I can take an aliyah, even though I'm not fasting. Why? So he said like this. Very interesting. Sam Sofer said, there's a marik. The marik writes that there are people that after Sukkot and Pesach, they have Tainis Bahab, right? Monday, Thursday, and Monday they fast 3 days, what we call Bahab. We say Slichas. I don't think you say Slichas, do you? Or Bahab. We say Slichas. Right. I know that the Nusach Sfard shuls in Bahab and Baltimore get full on Bahab because people decide, you know what, I'm going to go down Nusach Sfard. Now, then I won't have to say Slichas in Bahab. Right? So there's some Sfard shuls that they explode on Bahab. So the Marik had a question. It's Bahab, and there's a minyan of 10 people fasting. And there are such things in New York and in Yerushalayim. There are minyanim for Bahab. Now a person's a kohen, and they're laning by Yachal, especially by Mincha, where there's only Kriyas HaTorah on a fast. In the morning you can say, well, they're laning by Yachal, but still he's chayiv in Kriyas HaTorah in the morning. But by Mincha, the only time you lane on a Mincha is on a Tainus, or Shabbos, right? So there was a kohen in Shul of a minyan of Bahab fasters, and he didn't fast. So they asked the Marik what they should do, and they said the kohen should get out of the shul before Kriyas HaTorah starts. Because since he doesn't have the fast, he has no business getting an aliyah. But he can't be in the shul, because if he's in the shul, you got to call up a kohen. So the eitzah is, get out, before they bring the Sefer Torah out. Zoktach Sam Sefer, so maybe I should be the same thing. He wasn't a kohen, but maybe I should say, why should I take an aliyah if I'm not fasting anymore? I have no right to take an aliyah. Just like on Bahab, you can't take an aliyah. So some service says it's no comparison. On Bahab, the Sam Sefer says, the Kriya, if you're not fasting, it's not Bahab. You can't say, oh, I have Bahab today. Why do you have Bahab? You don't fast. You don't say Slichas. Even Slichas doesn't make it Bahab either. It's just a minute. But if you made a fast out of it, it's Bahab. If you didn't make a fast out of it because you weren't makabel to fast, it's not Bahab. So how can you take an aliyah? Especially by Mincha. He says, but the fact that I have to eat on Tisha B'Av, Dr. Sam Sefer, it's not Tisha B'Av. It's still Tisha B'Av. So he says two reasons. First of all, I have to eat because I have to eat, but I'm not supposed to eat regular. I have to eat as much as I have to eat. And second of all, it's a day of Avelus and mourning, and I have Tisha B'Av too. And therefore the Sam Sefer said, I can take an aliyah on Tisha B'Av even if I'm eating. Right? Now we'll see that his father-in-law, Nueberger, wasn't so sure. And I'm machlokes about this. Get to that in a second. But now let's go back to the bar mitzvah kid's dilemma who was chased out of his shul on Shavasar B'Tammuz because the rabbi wouldn't let him get an aliyah on his birthday. Right? So the question is, how do we look at this? Let's say even he's not chayiv in the fast. Because the fast is dependent on the fact that he was not chayiv on Shavasar B'Tammuz to fast. So is it not Shavasar B'Tammuz for him? Like you said, he's a gadol. And it's the day of Shavasar B'Tammuz. So even if he's not technically chayiv in the fast, you can say, it's not Shavasar B'Tammuz for this gadol? Right? You say, Bahab, you can say it's not Bahab because the whole Bahab is a fast. Shavasar B'Tammuz is Shavasar B'Tammuz, so why can't he fast? Why can't he get an aliyah? It's still Shavasar B'Tammuz. What?
It's only fasting, there's no aliyah.
Okay, so that's the question. So if it's only by Tisha B'Av, you're right. But if it's as far as I'm allowed, it still should be Shavasar B'Tammuz, just I'm allowed to eat. That's like Yachad Kollel. So let's say this kid's allowed to eat because he's a cotton, but today he's a gadol, he's still part of Shavasar B'Tammuz. You can still say, you can't say that if this is, Shavasar B'Tammuz is a Klal Yisrael fast. Bahab is a personal fast, right? So if he's a gadol in Shavasar B'Tammuz, the thinking is that he should be able to take an aliyah.
Even if he's not fasting.
Huh?
Even if he's not fasting for whatever reason.
Even if he's not fasting, it's Shabbos B'Tammuz.
It's a tiny tzibur.
Right. Not only that, this kid is fasting to boot. Right? No one says the kid can't fast.
I was fasting.
The kid was fasting, right? He's saying, in other words, like you said, the Rav would say he's not obligated to fast, but the kid fasts. So now he's fasting. He's participating in Shavuos B'Tammuz. You're not going to let him get an aliyah because it wasn't my mitzvah yesterday. Most poskim say, give the kid an aliyah. But there are a few that say not, but the Rav Shittas hold that way. Interestingly, Rabbi Kiva Eger, there's a famous tshuva in Rabbi Kiva Eger, where there was a person who was a chayla in Sakana, and they made a minyan in his house on Yom Kippur because he was too weak to go to shul. He was too weak to go to shul. So by Shacharis, they gave him an aliyah because they wanted him to get as many schusim as possible because he could die any day. So then they came up with a question, but he was eating because he was a chayla sheyesh by sakana. So then they had a question, can they give him an aliyah by mincha also? Maybe it wasn't like Yachad Kollel, they weren't selling the aliyahs, and it was in the guy's house, so he was able to get... What?
The Kyria comes on, if he wasn't Yachad Kollel, they could have.
Yeah, right.
According to him, Rabbi's going to say.
Right. So Kiveger said, well, is this chayla allowed to get another aliyah by mincha? So he says, well, it depends. If the kriyas hatayra by mincha is because of the fast, so then he's not fasting, he can't take an aliyah. But if the kriyas hatayra by Yom Kippur mincha is because Yom Kippur is like Shabbos that you make kriyas hatorah, so then even if he's not fasting, he should be able to get an aliyah. And the Kiveger wasn't sure which way it should be.
He's Taylor on the two minhagim of what we
No,
say.
he's not Taylor. The Marcheshes is Taylor.
Sorry, Kyria himself?
No, Marcheshes is Taylor. Take a look. Simon Chav Dalet, you will see. The Marcheshes says that it depends on the minute between Ashkenaz and Sfard, because when we lane Mafter Yonah, we stop with Mogging David, just like you do on a fast day. And Nusach Sfar does Al HaTorah, Al Avodah, Al Yom Kippurim Hazeh. So the Marchesha says, if you lane with Al HaTorah, Al Avodah, so then you're treating it like Shabbos. If you lane with just stopping by Mogen David like you do on every other tinus, then it depends if you fast. But the Chassam Sofer would tell you, and this is an argument between the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Kiveger, that even if he's not fasting, he can still take an Aliyah Yom Kippur. Why? Because it's not like Bahab, that it's not Bahab for you if you're not fasting. It's still Yom Kippur for you. And since it's Yom Kippur for you, just like on Tisha B'Av, he can take an Aliyah. So, because it's Tisha B'Av for him, so he has to eat, but he's not supposed to fast. He's not supposed to eat, as much as he wants. Only what he needs to stay alive. So this chayla also supposed to eat, but it's still Yom Kippur for him. So therefore, according to the Chassam Sofer, even if it's because of the fast day, the halacha would be he's allowed to take an aliyah, right? Interestingly, which I checked because I understand Sephardim don't have this minhag, but by Ashkenaz, we have a special tune for Kriyas HaTorah on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You don't, isn't that true? We have a special tune that we use different on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur by Shacharis than we use on a regular Shabbos. By Mincha, we go back to our regular tune that we do on every day and on Shabbos. So that fits with our minhag that we look at the Kriyas HaTorah on Mincha of Yom Kippur as not a Shabbos Dikidin, a Yom Kippur Dikidin, but a Tainus Dikidin. And therefore we don't have a special tune. But by Shachris of Rosh Hashanah, by Shachris of Yom Kippur, we have a special tune. That's an interesting observation. I think Rabbi Greenblatt made this observation, right? So halacha l'maaseh is right that if a kid is born on this coming Sunday, and in 30 years from now, it happens the same thing, most Poskim would tell you he can get an aliyah. For sure by Tisha B'Av, according to Stam Sefer and many other Poskim as well. And Mitzvah Shem, Abish should help that Mashiach should come, and even people that don't fast the Kol Yalma should get an aliyah because it should be Yontif. Right. Thank you. Yishmak Amen. Interesting, and the way you write is Shragi.
Some people said this is not possible, like in case they're deviating from this case.
I said it before. We have a. No, he doesn't say that. I'm writing to tell
But there is only the case is limbo. It's between these two cases.
Right, that's correct.
Right, am I right?
Yeah.
It's between. It could be Bahriya both ways. Am I right?
Yeah.
Because over there is a general general thing. Here, maybe it may Ikara, it wasn't never becomes like that. Almost like that.
But most Poskim say it should get no reason.
Yeah.